I think we should keep it focused on you guys, maybe pivot to Lee just for a moment here to hear his perspective, and then we'll talk to Bob. As a VP of a local news publishing company, can you talk to us a little bit about your experience and the impact that Google and Facebook have had on your business and what led you to pursue this case?
Well, I'm going to certainly leave the legal particulars to Paul and Bob, but what I can share with you, I'm an editor, so I deal in facts, and Paul covered the second half of the facts that I look at that I think are especially fascinating. And we should all be looking at. From 1962 to 2005. Newspaper industry advertising revenues increased from roughly 3.7 billion to roughly 49.4 billion. So that is a more than 12-fold increase over a 44-year period. In 39 of those 44 years, annual revenues increased year over year. You would be hard-pressed to find any industry that could claim that kind of a record of success for its primary source of income over that length of time. So that really explains how we got where we are in terms of how we operate, how we got where we were when this happened. So then from 2005, the period that you saw illustrated in Paul's PowerPoint, from 2005 to 2020, newspaper industry advertising revenues fell from 49.4 billion to 9.6 billion. Fell year over year, 15 of those 16 years. So that's a breathtaking collapse. The last 9 consecutive years, our revenues have fallen and at increased rates. So we've not had a year over the last 9 years in which we've had less than $1.4 billion in revenue losses year over year. So if that particular trend held up, if we continued to lose at least $1.4 billion in advertising revenues year over year, then within 5 years, we'd be at zero. So the end for our business is in sight if we don't do something. There are a lot of people, I think, who have placed what I believe to be false hope in circulation revenues. Circulation revenues have inched up. That's all they've done, is inch up. So we're basically fighting what I believe is a losing battle. And of course, over that same period of time, and Paul covered some of this, you go back to 2005. In 2005, of course, Facebook was a fledgling operation. Google was still relatively new, a few years old. Their revenues were $6 billion. We have numbers now in from 2020. Google alone had $184 or $183 billion in revenues in 2020 and $147 billion in advertising revenues, almost all of that U.S. advertising revenues. So those two companies combined have more than $200 billion in advertising revenue, while we're driven down to $9.6 billion. And in the lawsuit, which I've told people that in 36 years now in the newspaper business, I think there are 2 documents that are the most important I've ever read. And the first is our complaint. It outlines a lot of what Paul just went through. I think it's the most important document I've ever seen in the history of my time in the business. And the other is the News Media Alliance's white paper. Paul and Bob and Clayton Fitzsimmons drew heavily from that for our lawsuit that illustrates what happened, among other things, that Google and Facebook are controlling 70% of local digital advertising revenue, 99% of every dollar in increased digital advertising. So you can see what's happening. And that really is sort of the origin of how we ended up in this case, because I texted our managing partner, Doug Reynolds, one morning and about this and said, if we don't do something, if we don't act, we can't fight just to save our company. We have to fight to save the entire industry. If we don't, we're not going to make it. And that led to a conversation with Doug and I later that same day, in which Doug said, I think we need to file an antitrust claim. And it was a short time later that we flew out and met with Bob and had the conversation about it. I think people have to very seriously look at this. And one of the things that I think, just listening to Paul right now, that I hope everybody in our business contemplates, it's not only stopping what they're doing to us, but it's realizing the opportunity to grow and be a vibrant industry again. Because this country really needs us to do that. And from a business perspective, if we succeed, our business can go back to what it was in the sense that it was a great business. The opportunities abounded, just like I described in our increased in digital or our increased newspaper industry advertising revenues. I mean, it was a fantastic model. It worked. And I think if people would realize it, they'd see that we can be better than it. We can go from fighting for our lives to being stronger than we've ever been.
Well put, Lee. Yeah, thank you so much for that. I just want to point out, in case anyone's not noticing it, Paul is dropping answers to your questions in real time here. We had a question right at the beginning here about how can we join this fight. Email Clayton at fitzsimmonsfirm.com, and he's dropped a couple of the documents that Lee mentioned.